Let's start taking our page that we've drafted in Google Docs and start porting this over into WordPress. And a couple of quick caveats before we begin. In WordPress, once you are logged in, you're going to go into the Pages menu and you're going to select Add Page. Fine enough. You're going to see something like this that's going to say, welcome to the editor, and you can feel free to follow through on that. I'm not going to. I'm just going to close it. And by default, WordPress is going to kind of present you with sort of this minimalist thing. I don't really like this particular view, and so if you want to change it, just come up here to these little options, and instead of having it on full screen mode, just toggle that off, and you'll get access to this menu back over here on the left. If, however, you like that, then by all means, then feel free to leave that in full screen mode. This is what you'll probably see by default. Now, if you ever need to access any of those things, you can certainly hit this little menu up there and bounce out to go view the pages. The next thing is that you very likely have your Google Doc, and most of you will probably just have a document that only contains text. And very frequently what I see is something that we don't want to do, which is that most people will go into their document, they will just do Command or Control A, they'll copy it, they'll come over into WordPress, they'll hit Command or Control V, they'll paste it, and they'll plop it right into the page. And that is certainly one way to do it, but it makes for very boring pages because nobody actually wants to read those sorts of things any more than anybody probably really wants to read straight through just a big document like we have here in Google. So I like to do this in little bits and pieces, and it's usually based off of wherever it is that I have layout components, like for example, in this case, this image, or in places that I have things like, here's some table cells, for example. I'm going to have to do something with those. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to copy the first portion of this, where I'm going to have my page title, the H1, going to have my subheading, which you may or may not have, and I have this sort of introductory piece here that I want to insert. So I'm going to take those things and I'm going to copy them, and then I'm going to come over into WordPress and I'm just going to paste. And because we set the headings correctly in the Google document, they're going to come over into WordPress and they're going to be exactly what we need them to be. They're going to set this one by default to the H1, this one's going to be the H2, and then I'm going to have my little paragraph text here. Now, I'm going to make my WordPress window a little bit larger so we can see this a little more. But I'm fine with the title, and I'm fine with the subhead being the way that they are. But let's say that for purposes of my page layout, that I want to center this. Well, I can do that by just sort of clicking inside this block and changing the alignment from left, center, or to right. And I could do the same thing here, but I actually don't really want it to be just centered. That's kind of boring. And what I actually want is to insert a container around this block. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to select this, and I'm going to cut it, and then I'm going to type the slash, or you can hit the little plus sign over here. And when you do this, it's going to give you this option where you can pick one of these select few things that it's going to pop up here. These are sort of what it thinks is probably the most likely that you're after. But we can also start to type. And so if I type in con, like for container, I can get that, and then I can hit enter. And it's going to insert this little blue container into my page. And for more on containers, see the other video about sort of understanding the differences in the spacing and the margins and whatnot. Once I have this in here, I actually want to insert an inner container around it. The equivalent to this is sort of like if you might order a new toaster on Amazon, that Amazon will probably put the box that the toaster is in inside an Amazon shipping box. And then they will ship you the Amazon box that you will then open up, and then you will take out the box that has the toaster in it. And the toaster itself will also have a bunch of padding and packaging and stuff in it too. But they more than likely do not just send you merely, a Hamilton Beach toaster box just with the label on it. Sometimes they do, but not always. So that's kind of what we're doing here, is that what I have is my Amazon box, and what I want is to put the container of all the rest of my stuff inside there. And the way that I'm going to do this is that there's going to be this option to add inner container. And when you click it, it's going to look like it didn't do anything, but it did. What we've done is we've actually inserted a container inside of another container. Think of it like inserting a box into another box. but both boxes are precisely the same size, which is physically impossible in the real world because you would never be able to fit them in there. But we can do that here. And so here's how we're going to start to space some of this out. When you select inside this container, it's going to show you right here what you have selected, which is container. This option to its left will tell you what its parent block is, or in this case, what's the next thing higher up in the hierarchy around it. And if I click that, then I will have selected our Amazon box, the larger container around it. This is where I can start to set some stuff. I want to set within the confines of my sort of shipping box, I want to start configuring some things. And the way that I do that is over here in this right-hand menu, where the block is. You may have it set to page currently, but we want to set it to block. And we want to select the styles. And you're going to see a bunch of stuff down here that you can then decide to sort of browse through on your own and sort of play around with. But one of the things that I know that I want is under spacing. I want to tackle some of the padding and some of the margin around this. I want this text to sort of sit inset with a nice background color behind it, but I don't want it to be all sort of tucked up on the edges of the box. And so the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to say that I want some padding inside from the top and the bottom. And I'm going to do something generous, like 25 pixels. And I'm going to do the same thing on the left and the right, but I'm going to do 15 instead. Why more on the top and the bottom than the left and the right? Because on a mobile screen like a cell phone, that amount of space, 25 pixels, can consume 50 pixels on both ends, if you sort of assume on left and right, and that consumes quite a bit of space on a phone. So 15 is a little more conservative that way. And then, once I come in here, if I select this inner box, you can see that when I hover over my container, I now have 15 and 25 pixels on the top and the bottom, respectively, and the left and the right, of padding. Now, inside of this inner container, this innermost box, I can come in here and I can hit this little plus sign. I can hit the paragraph and I can paste my text. And so now I have a paragraph inside of an inner container, and that inner container is inside a larger container. We do this so we give ourselves a maximum amount of options, because now what I want is I want to set the background on this parent container. And I'm going to change the background color to be, something kind of light, like this, perhaps. Like a nice little gold there. Okay? And now I have my paragraph inside there, and it's in this inner container. But you're going to notice that as you do this, one of the curious things is that it looks like there's more space down here than there is up top. And so why is that? And it's because the paragraph, by default in a web browser, automatically has some formatting to it. And one of the ways that we can sort of change up this so that way the text remains, but we sort of remove that superfluous padding in this context, because I don't want it to have more space down here. And if I try to add more at the top, it's just going to be a mathematical nightmare. What I do is I can change this paragraph into something else. I could change it into, say, a code block, or I could change it into a pull quote, or a bulleted list, or a heading. I don't want it to be any of those things. What I'm actually looking for is there's an option in here that's just called text. And this text with sort of this big blocky T is going to give me more options. And so when I convert it to that, it's going to now have more options to choose from up here, including this one that says P. And I can change the tag to no longer be a paragraph, but I can change it to just be a div. And that removes it from being a paragraph and changes it instead to basically just a division of just text. Just a single, simple block of text. I can center that like so. And I could even come in here and decide that maybe I want to change the typography of this a little bit. And so maybe I come in here and I decide, you know what? I don't want it to be sort of this default font size. Maybe I want it to be a little bit bigger. And so maybe I decide that I want to do something like 1.5 ems. EMs is my metric unit there. Ems is actually a measure of the size of the actual letter M, which is the largest physical footprint. A large capital M is the physical footprint largest of any letter in the alphabet, at least in English. And so this is sort of a relative measure. It works better than pixels. And we use ems for font size because it scales nicely whether a person's on, say, a phone, a tablet, or a PC, or a large 32-inch monitor, or whatever they might have. And you can even change this live. Maybe I don't want it to be 1.5. Maybe I want it to be 1.2. That seems a little small. Maybe I want 1.3. And I kind of like that. So now I have my text in here. And then I can come back and I can start pulling in another block. But you'll notice that when I do this, and I've copied this from over here and I paste it over here into WordPress, that I have this space that is like there's no space in between where the bottom of this block begins and where this ends. I do up here, and that's because there's some built-in space underneath text already configured in this site CSS. But what I need to do is I need to add margin. I need to add space between the top and the bottom of this outermost container. And so if I come in here and I just click inside the box to navigate, I can see that I have this text. If I click on the parent block, it will select the container by putting that blue line around it. And then if I select again, it's going to take the parent block, which is sort of our Amazon shipping box in my metaphor here. Okay? And I want to come back over here into my spacing and change the margin to be something a little more generous, maybe like 35 pixels on the top and the bottom. And when I do that, it automatically spaces these things out and I have a uniform amount of space between them. And that's exactly what I want. I can continue to sort of come down here and I have, for example, this image that I can insert. It is possible, although I find that it is very flaky, to copy out of Google Docs. At least images. They are really stuck in there. And so my suggestion in this circumstance is that you can come over here and you can select to embed an image. There's actually a couple of different options. One's sort of a simpler image, one's sort of a more complicated one. We'll use the simple one here. And I can come in here and I could upload a file from my computer, or I could browse the media library, which currently does not have anything in there. But any other images, including from your classmates, will appear inside the media library. And I can, plop that in there and let that image sit in that spot. For now, because I want to come back and do that later, I'll just leave that there, and it'll leave it as a placeholder with a thin line behind it. Let's say that I want to insert these items, but the thing is that I don't really want them to sort of stretch across the page. I don't want them to sort of sit like that because it's kind of boring. And so what I actually want is to insert a grid. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to delete those. And here at the bottom, where I don't have anything else, I can come down here and I can either hit this little plus sign or I can start typing / and again, I want to insert a container because I want to have maximum amount of options and control over what it is that the formatting of this is going to look like. So I'm going to insert a container. This way I can control some of the spacing above and below. And in fact, I can come in here already and I can say I want 35 pixels on the top and the bottom to space this out. I'm going to insert some padding as well. If, for whatever reason, you decide, you know what, I want 25 pixels around all sides, you can insert that in one spot and then tell it to link all sides. And when you do that, it'll just automatically make 25 pixels on every side of that container. And then I can insert my inner container. Now I have my inner container, and I have sort of my outer, my shipping box, so to speak. And inside of this one, I'm going to insert a grid. Not a grod, a grid. And there's a couple of options in here. I like this one with the blue because it gives me a little more control over what it is that this is going to look like. And now I can come in and it's going to by default sort of insert a 2-column grid. And if I select the whole thing, so if I'm clicking inside of one of the boxes, I can say select the parent grid. And under layout over here, there's some technical options that some of you who are more developer oriented might be familiar with, like flex and grid layout and the alignment of these things. We'll cover more of that stuff at a later time. But you can also sort of come into the sizing and spacing and see all the similar kinds of options there for that. But if you come back over here to the settings for this block, there is a handy little layout option in here where you can tell it to be like, no, I want 3 columns or 4 columns or I want one skinny column on the left and one big one on the right, or vice versa. And there's a couple of other little formatting options in here that are quite nice. I have decided that what I want is the two columns, the 3-1 measure, so that way it's 75% of one and 25% of another. And the reason for that is because then if I come in here and I come to my paragraph and paste in my text, I have something that doesn't consume the whole width of the space. It allows me to have a column that maybe I could insert something else. Maybe I could put in some icons, or maybe I could put in some images. Maybe I could put in, I don't know, some background texture, any number of things that I might want to do there. And I can come in here and maybe I've decided that, I like all these the way that this is. And, I can decide that maybe what I want is to have a background color around just this one grid column. Maybe I don't want the color over here. I want all the color over here. And so I can come in here. I can click once, select the element that it's in, which is this one grid column. I can come back over here into my styles, and that's assuming that you're using this specific grid block. If you're using another grid block, you may have a different set of options that give you different control. Experiment around. There's not a lot of right or wrong answers here. And I can come into this backgrounds and I can say, oh, I can do a background, and let's assume that I don't want just a color. Maybe I want it to be a gradient. And so I can change the background type from image to gradient. And it's going to default to this ugly black and white. But I can change this to something that is much lighter. Subtlety will get you far in a lot of this. Maybe it fades to white. Okay. And I don't really care for it to be left to right. That's kind of odd. I also don't like the fact that it has this, there's no space between where the gradient color starts and where the text begins. But we'll fix that in a second. What I want is I can sort of change the angle of this so that way it comes from like a different side or something. Maybe I want it to be top to bottom like that. So that way it's got a color at the top and then it fades out to white. I can even change sort of precisely where the color starts to change up and down the line, or where it ends. So maybe I want it to end someplace like this, so that way it fades to white faster. And so I'm just going to make that an even 50. That way it's at 50% down and it's gone, which is what I want. But I need to fix my padding now. And so if I come back up into this spacing, I can decide, you know what, I'm going to link this because I want 15 pixels of padding around all sides. And so now it's going to pull that in a little bit. So what do I have here? I actually have several nested blocks and containers with all sorts of different settings in here. And it's important that you kind of try to remember sort of how you've set this up. So I have a list. I have an unordered list, a bulleted list. In HTML, we would call this an unordered list. If it was a numbered list, that would be in HTML parlance an ordered list. So if I click in there, I can select that, and now I've selected my list because that is the item that is right here on the edge of this sort of block to the right. If I select again, it's going to select the container, which is this grid or part of this grid because I have the two columns in there. And if I select again, it's going to select both of the columns. And if I select again, it's going to pick the container that's around it. And if I select again, it's going to pick sort of what I'm going to call our shipping box, the outermost container of this. And so the outer container is maintaining the spacing between all the other elements. There is an inner container that's holding our grid together. And inside the grid, this one on the left, this leftmost column, has some background color, and it also has some padding around all sides. I'm going to continue down the page working on pulling some things in like this and continuing to insert containers. So for example, I have a container here. I'm going to insert an inner container, and then I'm going to do a search for buttons. And there are options here for these things, but I'm going to pick this one with the blue. And because I have this thought here for a CTA, for a call to action, and I want it to say request a quote, right? And I can select that. And here's my options for where I can add a link. And all of my options for what it looks like sort of sits over here. And you can decide sort of what color these things should be. Maybe we want it to be kind of a nice little green here, for example. Something like that. And you can even get into the borders, and you can change maybe the border radius. Maybe you don't want it to have such a stark corner to it. And so you can decide, you know what, the border radius is going to be 10 pixels. And that's going to make our button automatically slice off those edges. Maybe we decide that we want a 1 pixel border around it, but the 1 pixel border needs to be like a slightly darker green, perhaps. This is a pro tip that makes a little bit of depth on buttons when you have something that is a similar color as what the color of the button is, but if you give it a stroke, or in this case a border, that is 1 or 2 pixels, that's just a little bit darker. It's very subtle, but looks quite nice. We can come in here and we can change the typography of this. We could change the spacing of these things. We could even decide what the hover controls are going to be, because if we look at this, when we hover over it, it defaults to blue. If you decide that you want to change that, you can come over here where it says hover selector, click on it, and then it's going to allow you to now change the background color for what the hover state is. And maybe the hover state goes to something like this. So that way we have a slightly different shade of blue. And maybe we also decide that that 2 pixel border becomes sort of a slightly darker blue like that. Okay. You can also decide to add backgrounds to it. You could add gradients to this button, which would be nice. You could change the alignment of this by modifying sort of how things are centered in this whole container, so that way our button is directly in the center. The container that it's sitting in will also allow us to sort of change the margin above and below it. We can change all sorts of things around that by making sure that we always insert these things into containers as we go. So I'm going to continue to do this and port things from my Google document into this page. You'll notice that for the most part, I have some relatively simple sections here, but I'm also going to insert more buttons, and I'm going to insert some FAQs, which are going to be done with accordions down at the bottom. And this section here is a table in my Google document, which I don't want to use. We don't want to use tables inside of a web page like this. They're not mobile friendly. They're not friendly on phones. They don't resize well. It's a very old standard. Tables are for tabular data only. And this is not that. What I've got here is a grid of 4 columns, each one set at about 25%. So I would come in here, I would insert a container. I'd insert an inner container. I'd insert a grid inside of that inner container. And in that grid, I would change the settings so that way it would be 4 columns and it will automatically set them to be 25%. Why do we do that with the automated columns? Because as it shrinks on a phone, it will stack them. So that way, instead of having 4 squished little columns, you'll actually have 4 boxes that neatly go down the page.